Should you use React Native Web for your next project? This is a question I was asking myself a couple months ago when trying to decide how to build an app for a project I was working on. Now, I didn't end up choosing React Native Web, but I've been getting a lot of questions about it lately, so I wanted to kind of make a video and share some of my thoughts about it. So for those of you that are not familiar with it, what it allows you to do is take some of the React Native components and render them on the web. So they have a nice website where they kind of show you all the examples of React Native components and what they look like when rendered on the web. So here's a flat list example, and we can see it's just kind of a list, and then you can kind of notice here are some props that you might be familiar with if you've used this component in React Native. Now if we go back, we can see there's a ton of other components, and they're all the ones from React Native. So now what makes this project intriguing or interesting is it allows you to create a React Native app and basically take that and render it on the web. So the goal of this is to kind of reduce the amount of code you're doing for both building a website and building an app at the same time. You kind of share the code, a ton of components kind of between the two. And what's really interesting about this project as well is there's a lot of big companies using it. So here's a few list of companies that are using it in production right now. And that is more than just a few. So that's kind of interesting to see more than just a couple using it. And I bet there's even more right now than just these guys. Anyway, another thing that just popped up recently is the creator of Styled Components recently sold his company Spectrum to GitHub and was talking about some of their regrets when building the project. And one of the first regrets was not using React Native Web in their project. And basically, he was talking about it'd be so nice to be able to share the code between the app and the website and not have to be rebuilding it from scratch, which I definitely was something that really appealed to me as well. And another thing that recently came out was a project called DevHub, which was open sourced, and it's an open source React Native web project. And it is claiming 95% code sharing, which is just insane. So what that means is this project has a website and it has an app. So it has both an iOS, Android app, and a website from a single React Native code base, except for 5% that they're doing for each one. Here's what it looks like. And I believe they also are working, I don't know if it's out yet, I haven't been following it, but the Electron app, which is kind of what this looks like as well from this code base, which is really interesting. But you'll notice this is kind of a desktop view, even if it's maybe on Electron. And then here is kind of what an app view of it looks like. And this is basically what this application is for, kind of a GitHub, being able to access the stuff from that. So it's very cool to see some projects adopting this, and I really want to dive into the code for this project and kind of see what it looks like for a real project to be using React Native Web, what the code looks like for it. So this is something that I really want to look into, and I didn't have access to when I was first kind of analyzing whether to use this project or not. But one thing that I really like about React Native Web is being able to share the code. But I think you only really get this code sharing when you have a super similar UI from both the website and the app. And so I think that for a lot of sites that makes sense. For example, Twitter is like that. For example, this site is like that, where basically you want a very similar experience, whether you're on the website or whether you're on the app. And they're going to look almost identical. And maybe on the desktop, it's going to be a little bit different. You might have to scale it out, but it's still going to be very similar to what the phones look like. And I think that's where React Native Web shines, is when you want something where the app and the website are going to be super similar. And you want the experience where on those devices, you're basically just kind of scaling that view up a little bit for the desktop. I think where it's not as good, or something where I'm not sure how well it'll be, and that was one thing that I wasn't sure about, was if you want something totally different for the desktop. If you want the desktop layout to be different from the app for whatever reason, then I think it makes less sense to try out React Native Web. Now again, I didn't actually end up choosing it or trying it out yet, so I don't know for sure. But that was one thing that was like, if I want a totally different desktop view than the app view, I'm not sure how much using this will help. But I think a lot of apps nowadays, you're going to have a very similar app to the website, and you're going to be targeting phones versus computers. I don't think you really have too many apps that are focused on computers, or at least a laptop view. I think a lot more of devices, or at least applications, are targeting an app or at least a phone, whether that's an app or a website. So then I think it makes a lot of sense to use React Native Web for that. Now I want to kind of go over a few concerns I had whenever I was looking over the project, because I was really excited about being able to share the code, and I really liked seeing that there were some big companies behind it and using it. So those were really two big positive ones. The few of the things that I was not sure about, the first one being, while it's popular with big companies, or at least there are some big companies using it, there's not a ton of people that are actually using the project. As in, while it is, if you look at the stars, it does have a decent number of stars. There's just going to be less like things on Stack Overflow. You're going to be searching issues that come up, and there's just going to be less things talked about with it. So when you run into a problem, it may be harder to solve it. You may have to jump into the source code to figure out what's going on, and there's just going to be less people hitting the same problems you're facing because it's not as popular as some other solutions. The next one is third-party libraries. I wasn't sure how great the support would be for installing NPM packages. So my guess is because it takes your React Native components, so whatever components here, and it renders them on the web, I'm thinking you can only use React Native libraries for this, or libraries which don't care if you're using React Native or React. So for example, Redux, MobX would work, but for like anything that's using React Native components, I'm not sure if it would work with React Native Web, and I'm assuming you're only able to use React Native components and not React components if you want to share. Now, of course, you can go ahead and you don't have to share all your code. You can get like 70% code sharing, and that's still really good. But I wasn't sure how great the library support would be and what it would be like, because the React Native libraries are not great. There's not a ton of them, especially compared to React. React Native doesn't have as many, so paring that down back, I'm not sure how many are actually support React Native Web. Though I'll tell you, React Navigation, I believe, does support it now, and that's a big one for being able to navigate in your React Native apps. And then lastly, one thing that I noticed when just looking at the README is it's compatible with React Native version 0.55. And so that's a few versions behind. So I wasn't sure what's up with that. And I wasn't sure like how hard it is to have it compatible with the latest version. And I don't know if that means, like, for example, if I was using React Native Web, if I couldn't use things like React hooks with the latest version of React Native. I'm not sure how that works. Because I know React, you can install the latest version of React and have a different version of React Native in your project. So that was something that I was unsure about. So I'm not sure, not only just for using hooks and some of the latest React features, but also like it's behind a few versions of React Native, which is kind of weird. I'm not sure how hard it is to make it compatible with the newer versions, if it's always going to be behind some. So that's not a huge thing. That was just something I noticed. But anyway, I'm interested to try out React Native Web, and I'm probably going to be making some videos on it in the future because it is interesting to me, and being able to do something like this makes a lot of sense, I think, in a lot of applications where you can kind of just have a single code base for multiple exporting to both the phone and the app, or the website and the app. Makes a lot of sense. I'm curious if any of you guys have tried this. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts and experiences with using it.